Larry Buxton here. Welcome back to another edition of Leading with Spirit. The week before my brother died, our pastor preached on the story in Luke 7 where a woman enters a dinner party and begins boldly bathing Jesus' feet with her tears. You may remember the story. The host is incensed by her inappropriate behavior, but Jesus takes up for her. "Do you see this woman?" Jesus says, and he proceeds to reframe her behavior, to elevate her as a woman of gratitude and grace. And in her sermon, our preacher zeroed in on the phrase, "Do you see this woman? Do you really see her?" Now, the host couldn't get past his initial critical impression. The question is, can we? Can we see each other with more gratitude and grace? Days later, I found myself sitting in the celebration of life service for my younger brother. Craig was a pastor too, and he died suddenly in late February, just a blow to us all. And now people were standing up publicly to describe and honor the man that I'd known literally all his life. And I was convicted that how I had seen Craig for so long was such a narrow slice of the man that he was. While I knew well his quips and his idiosyncrasies, I'd minimized the qualities that so many people now were testifying to. His generosity, his humor, his kindness, his intelligence, and his encouragement. And I'd missed seeing him in all his fullness, and I began to feel in that both his loss and my inadequacy more keenly. Later on, I returned to Jesus' words and Jesus' life and noticed that Jesus looks at the same behavior everyone else does, but he sees more deeply. Because looking at requires only our eyes, but seeing requires our hearts. And not just our hearts, but also our imaginations, our love, our faith, even our hopefulness. Seeing is a sacred action, and Jesus helps us learn this sacred action as we see his own life. That is, at Christmas we see Jesus as an infant, so that we can more readily see him in an infant, in the helpless child in our lives who needs tenderness and protection. We see Jesus as a young adolescent, soaking up knowledge in the temple and castigating his anxious parents, so that we can see him more readily in the growing adolescent, the fumbling, challenging, critical teenager. In Lent, we see Jesus as a suffering adult, scarred and weak, so that perhaps we can more readily see him in the scarred, suffering adults who populate our neighborhoods, our hospitals, and our headlines. And at the end of Lent, we see Jesus at his death, so that in our time we too might see him in death, in our own and in the death of those we love. We learn that seeing doesn't begin with eyesight, it begins with insight. Seeing someone else is a habit grown in solitude and reflection, watered by prayer, nourished by gratitude. Because what we believe about a person's worth is what we will come to recognize. So that's how I've learned again, to turn the old saying on its head and to recognize that believing leads to seeing, or as we say, not seeing is believing, but believing is seeing. And so it is. I hope you might think of a person who might value this video. Pass it along. You'll find it and others like it on LarryBuxton.com. As always, God bless you, and I hope to see you soon.